in China, 1 out of every 3 cars sold is an EV. The biggest sellers are BYD, Tesla, and state-owned GAC.
I think the narrative out there, just kind of the bigger picture on EVs right now is, gee, maybe demand isn't as high as we all thought at one point.
How does a company like Rivian sort of navigate this broader slowdown in the EV market, which is tough already for a company like a Tesla, but the challenge is even more acute if you're a smaller EV startup like a Rivian?
Good news for Ford, good news for the UAW.
All that and more. So let's get to it. Tesla stock is up in the pre-market a little over 1%, sitting at 197.15. Could we see an overall lift in the stock market thanks to Nvidia from yesterday? I suppose only time will tell, but I may just have to jump ship on the protective put that I placed.
Here in China, 1 out of every 3 cars sold is an EV. The biggest sellers are BYD, Tesla, and state-owned GAC. BYD had the 5 most popular battery and plug-in hybrids last year, with prices ranging from $16,000 to $30,000. Tesla is still on top on the high end, with its bestseller, the Model Y, at $37,000 to $50,000.
In a few years' time, something tells me Tesla will be dominating that cheaper market as well. Enjoy it while you can, BYD. Enjoy it while you can.
The ranges of the BYDs are around 250 to 375 miles. The Model Y in the 340 range. EVs appeal to China's wealthy, tech-savvy, and environmentally conscious, but increasingly to those on a budget, after years of government subsidies promoted production and infrastructure.
Government subsidies kind of sounds like the IRA. I wonder how long it will take the US to get to China's point, where 1 out of 3 vehicles sold is an EV. Trust me, it's not if, only a matter of when.
The government's ratio of EVs to charging points is around 2.5 to 1, with economically developed provinces and cities like Beijing and Shanghai most equipped. Now over to Arabile Gumede for a look at the EV landscape in Europe.
The latest data shows that over 20% of new car registrations in Europe were electric vehicles.
20%, so we got about a third in China, 20% in Europe, around 10% in America. Yeah, something tells me it's going to grow a little more rapidly here in the United States. I wonder who's going to get the lion's share of that growth.
In 2023, the IRA required that at least half of the value of battery components had to be assembled in North America, and that 40% of the raw materials had to be sourced from the U.S. And in 2027, that raw material requirement is going to double to 80%. Are those numbers, can they be achieved in that time frame?
If you'd like a competitive advantage here in America, you better do it. Something tells me that some companies are going to find this a little harder than others.
You know, it sort of depends on which company you ask. And I think, you know, some of the concerns that the industry is having here is the fact that some of these raw materials, the prices have really collapsed. And you know, that you would sort of think, oh, that's a good thing for the auto companies. But if you're trying to build a supply chain in North America for these raw materials and the prices for them have absolutely, you know, sort of the bottom has come out. I think of lithium in particular, you've seen just this dramatic, you know, drop in prices that significantly undermines the economics of those projects. And so, you know, I think the raw materials in particular are a real challenge. I think battery components will be less of a challenge, but even there, it is, you know, a matter of you can't just sort of snap your fingers and open up a bunch of plants for these various components. You know, it does take time.
And Craig, across the automakers, I'm looking at the reporting again. 7 of Tesla's 12 models sold in the U.S. fully cleared the IRA's sourcing hurdles and qualified for the tax credit. What percentage of EVs being sold in the U.S. are clearing that hurdle?
I think because Tesla is still so dominant in the U.S., we're at a point where, you know, the EVs that do the most volume are largely qualifying at the moment. But I think the fact that those raw material requirements that kick in next year and then escalate in the years that follow, that's really where we're going to see even more of a sort of, level of screws put on the industry.
It's amazing what foresight can do for you. GM, Ford, they're scrambling, trying to meet the needs and the requirements of the IRA, where Tesla's been thinking about this stuff, I don't know, a decade ago? Not for any reasons like a government subsidy or anything like that, only because it makes economic sense. We have a goal of reaching 20 million vehicles per year. To do that, we need a ton more batteries. Localizing the supply chain is in our best interest because, I don't know, transportation costs are ridiculous. Setting up factories where the people are buying your vehicles only makes sense. The upfront costs may be a little high, but in the long run, you're going to benefit greatly. It's no surprise that Tesla is the most set up to benefit from the IRA, so much in fact that I can't see them continuing this program for very much longer because the rest of the automotive industry just isn't going to benefit. And Tesla doesn't need these. They already have industry-leading margins.
I think the narrative out there, just kind of the bigger picture on EVs right now is, maybe demand isn't as high as we all thought at one point. We've got, the big auto manufacturers pulling back, like Ford, for example. Loss is still big. What's your understanding when you talk to your sources as to how people are thinking about the ultimate demand for EVs over the next 1 to 3 to 5 years?
Perversely, it was a challenge that, for a time, business was too good.
Yeah.
The fact that, for a while there, so many companies, actually had back orders. Tesla in particular, had demand issues as opposed to a supply issue. That, really sort of caused this, unsustainable, jacking up of prices. The fact that that has had to come down, I would say, more dramatically than we've seen for the rest of the industry has had all sorts of, unintended consequences. When you, so dramatically bring down prices on the new side, the used side is of the equation. The used vehicles really lose their value. And the fact that I think EVs maybe have some sort of, particular challenges with, maintaining their value. When you think about a used, gas car, you don't worry about, the engine holding up. You maybe have, relatively more concern, rightfully or not, as to whether or not the battery is going to hold up.
First, Legacy Auto found out that this isn't as easy as Tesla makes it look. How the hell are they having margins so high? Ford, GM, they would go bankrupt if they tried to keep pace with Tesla's pricing or production level. Their targets were ridiculous when they first left their mouths, and Tesla's prices have to drop. They have to open up the total addressable market to get more and more people inside their vehicles, especially as they're producing more and more vehicles every single year. The prices of Tesla vehicles will fluctuate depending on where we're at on that adoption S-curve. I mean, it'd be great if Ford and GM had a product that was rivaling something that Tesla creates, but they don't. So we have a predictable slowdown. And it wouldn't matter because Legacy Auto hasn't figured out how to make these things profitably anyway.
I think when we step back, the fact that EVs is sort of, the way forward, particularly in terms of, where the regulators want to see this industry go. I think we've seen that China is able to make this work. We've seen that Europe is much further along in this transition. I think the question for the U.S. is whether we can sort of, get Americans who tend to like bigger vehicles to come around to electric vehicles. I think that also adds some complications to the mix as well.
I know you're not telling me that the U.S. can't do what Europe and China are doing. I know that's not what you're telling me. Not my country. Not my country. As a matter of fact, I'll issue a challenge to my fellow Americans. Let's at least surpass Europe within the next couple of years. And by the end of the decade, maybe, just maybe, we can take the crown from China and be the leader in EV adoption.
Shares of EV maker Rivian down by 10% after the company's production target for the full year was well short of the street's estimates. The EV maker reported a wider adjusted loss per share than expected as well, and said it's cutting 10% of salaried jobs here. So for the full year, Rivian now says it will produce just 57,000 vehicles. The average analyst estimate, I believe, was 80,000, as it does announce this cut of 10% of salaried jobs. It looks like the only number that did not miss estimates was the revenue for the fourth quarter, which came in at $1.32 billion versus the $1.25 billion that analysts had been anticipating. Production in the fourth quarter was also a little higher than estimated, although deliveries at just under 14,000 missed the average analyst estimate.
Rivian stock takes a pretty big hit on this news, but just like Tesla, they're in a transitional period. This R2 platform, if it's doing what they say it will do, Rivian may be on to something.
Yeah, and remember, headed into this report, Julie, this stock was already under a ton of pressure. It was already down about 30% so far this year. And I think there have been kind of broader questions, right? How does a company like Rivian sort of navigate this broader slowdown in the EV market, which is tough already for a company like a Tesla, but the challenge is even more acute if you're a smaller EV startup like a Rivian.
Not too long ago, Tesla was also considered a small startup, until they weren't. Once Rivian cuts their teeth on the mass market, things are going to change for that company.
I know that your forecast was higher than 57,000 here. Do you think that this is a factor of the general slowing in demand in the EV market, or is there something specific to Rivian?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both, right? Rivian is still kind of in that stage that Tesla was in its early life, when it was sort of in that high-priced vehicle category. Rivian still falls into that bucket ahead of when they launched the R2 vehicle, and as a result, they're maybe a little bit more exposed to these sort of macro swings, and so I do think that's sort of a part of the overall story. But I think all that said, it has to be taken into account that Rivian did execute well in 2023. So some of this is being proactive on their part, I would assume.
I guess, what are the catalysts ahead that you think moves this stock higher?
Yeah, we need to see the R2 platform announced. That's coming next March 7th, so in a few weeks here. And then as we go through the year, I think the biggest catalyst is going to be, can they push toward those positive gross margins for the R1 line and the commercial vehicles, because that's the biggest question investors are contending with right now is, can this company produce vehicles at a profit? And they need to show that they can. That's, I think, by far the most important factor.
Not just Rivian, that's the most important factor for anybody making these vehicles. It's not as easy as Tesla makes it look.
Ford's Kentucky truck factory averting another UAW strike. Here with the very latest is Yahoo Finance's Praz Submaranian. Praz.
Hey, so strike averted, like you mentioned. There was this local UAW laws that were not necessarily being signed off on with the UAW and Ford. UAW on Friday threatened that they would strike this plant on Friday if they didn't get these local laws kind of signed off on, and then they did. It's really interesting because this was that same plant that had a stand-up strike during the October strikes, and that was a big deal for Ford, the most profitable plant there. So good news for Ford, good news for the UAW, but there's also a number of other plants, several other plants across the country, UAW plants that don't have local laws sort of signed on UAW agreements, and there's 19 other Ford plants that have expired agreements. So this issue could pick up again, but I think this is more of a political sort of gamesmanship.
Take care of your moneymaker first, but these other 19 plants, Ford, go ahead and finish that up. Just give the people what they need in order to make you the most money possible. The transition's going to be hard enough. And it's not just Ford. GM, Stellantis, let's put this to bed. You got a lot of other things to worry about. In conclusion, there's a global EV slowdown. 1 in 3 cars sold in China are electric. 1 in 5 cars sold in Europe, electric. 1 in 10 are electric here in the United States. I posit that these numbers are directly proportionate to how much these vehicles cost. Sure, there may be some infrastructure issues here or there, but ultimately, it comes down to the total addressable market. It's no surprise that China has the cheapest battery electric vehicles on the planet and has the largest adoption rate. In a few years' time, Tesla's next generation vehicle is going to blow the doors off of these figures. Rivian's Q4 earnings report, yeah, that disappointed a few analysts. And the stock was punished for it. But Rivian, the company, they're doing all the right things in order for them to survive the decade. I'll be curious to see how the R2 platform does here in the future, and whether Rivian can make itself profitable from selling battery electric vehicles. And Ford's Kentucky plant avoids a local strike. Good news for both Ford and the UAW, but the continued strife amongst UAW workers and the legacy automotive manufacturers, that doesn't instill a lot of confidence moving forward. This resistance, it won't be good for legacy auto's transition into the future. That's all I got for you today. Be easy. Peace.